I pulled into my mother's driveway on Christmas morning with my 7-year-old son, Tyler, bouncing excitedly in the back seat, clutching the plate of sugar cookies we had spent all of yesterday afternoon decorating together. The red brick colonial looked picture perfect, with its white shutters and evergreen wreaths, just like every Christmas since my childhood. Tyler had insisted on wearing his best button-down shirt and tie, wanting to look special for his first big family Christmas, since the adoption became final 6 months ago. We walked up the familiar stone pathway carrying our carefully wrapped presents, Tyler, practically skipping with anticipation. But when my 12-year-old niece, Emma, opened the front door, she looked straight at Tyler and announced loudly enough for everyone inside to hear, "Grandma told me you're not her real grandson because you're adopted." So, my sister Jessica giggled behind her wine glass, while my mother Margaret continued arranging cloth napkins on the dining room table as if nothing had happened. The cheerful holiday chatter died, instantly replaced by suffocating silence. But nobody corrected Emma's words. I watched Tyler's bright smile crumble into confusion as he looked around the room for someone to tell him it wasn't true. When no one spoke up, I silently took the presents from Tyler's small hands, packed up our cookies, and walked out without saying a single word. The drive home felt like the longest 23 minutes of my life. Tyler sat quietly in his car seat, occasionally asking why we had left Grandma's house so early when we hadn't even eaten dinner yet. I kept my voice steady while explaining that sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're stressed, but inside, I was falling apart. How could my own family treat my son like he wasn't worthy of basic human decency? Tyler was everything to me. This incredible little boy who had come into my life through the foster system 2 years earlier and had filled every corner of my world with laughter and purpose. That evening, after Tyler finally fell asleep clutching his favorite stuffed elephant, my phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. The casual tone made my blood run cold. "Wade, honey, just wondering if you've sent the family bonus yet this month. Jessica really needs help with the mortgage payment, and Dave's unemployment benefits ran out last week. You know how much we appreciate everything you do for us." I stared at that message for a solid 10 minutes, my hands actually shaking with rage. The family bonus. $15,000 I had been sending every month for the past 3 years to help keep my sister's family afloat. Money that came directly out of the college fund I was building for Tyler, out of the vacation savings we were accumulating for a trip to Disney World, out of my own future security. And these people who gladly cashed my checks every month had just stood there and let a 12-year-old girl tell my son he wasn't real family. I started scrolling through my banking app, adding up exactly how much money I had sent to my mother and sister over the years. The number was staggering. Nearly $500,000 in total when I included the emergency car repairs, medical bills, home improvement projects, and private school tuition for Emma that I had covered. All while they apparently considered Tyler some kind of lesser being who didn't deserve basic respect or inclusion. My phone rang around 9:30. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. When I finally picked up, her voice was artificially sweet. "Wade, sweetheart, I was hoping we could talk about what happened today. You left so abruptly, and poor Emma didn't understand why everyone got upset. She's just a child, you know. Sometimes kids say things without thinking. Emma's 12 years old, Mom. She's old enough to understand exactly what she was saying." "Well, yes, but you have to understand her perspective. She's been the only grandchild for so long, and now suddenly there's this new boy who—" Margaret's voice trailed off as she realized what she was about to say. "Who what, Mom? Go ahead and finish that sentence." A long pause stretched between us. "Wade, you know I love Tyler, but you have to admit it's different. He's not actually blood family. Emma's my biological granddaughter, and there's nothing wrong with her understanding that distinction." I hung up without another word. The next morning, I called my bank and had them pull up a complete record of every transaction I had ever made to anyone in my family. The statements painted a clear picture of financial dependency that I had somehow been blind to for years. My mother's mortgage payments, Jessica's credit card bills, Dave's truck payments, Emma's cheerleading uniforms, and competition fees. I had been subsidizing their entire lifestyle, while they systematically excluded the most important person in my world. But the worst part was still coming. That afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Patterson from next door while getting my mail. She was an elderly widow who had always been kind to Tyler, often commenting on what a polite and sweet child he was. Today, though, she looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Wade, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with your family? Your mother mentioned at the neighborhood book club last week that Tyler isn't really your son, just some foster child. You're helping out temporarily." She seemed quite concerned that you haven't given her any real grandchildren yet. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Mrs. Patterson kept talking, apparently unaware that she was destroying what remained of my faith in my family. "Your mother said she's been praying that you'll meet a nice woman soon and settle down properly. She mentioned that, while it's admirable that you're helping that little boy, it's not the same as having your own children. I hope I'm not overstepping by bringing this up, but as a grandmother myself, I can understand her disappointment." After Mrs. Patterson went inside, I sat on my front steps for nearly an hour, trying to process what I had just learned. My mother hadn't just passively allowed Emma's cruelty at Christmas dinner. She had been actively telling our neighbors that Tyler didn't count as her grandson, that my relationship with him was temporary charity work, rather than permanent family love. I needed to know how deep this went. That evening, after Tyler was in bed reading, I started making phone calls. First, I called my cousin Rachel in Portland, someone I had always considered reasonable and fair-minded. We had grown up together, and she had always been supportive when I told family members about my decision to adopt Tyler. "Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What has my mother been telling the family about Tyler?" A long silence stretched across the phone line. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was careful and hesitant. "Wade, I thought you knew. I assumed you were okay with how Aunt Margaret talked about the situation." "What situation? He's my son. I adopted him. What could there possibly be to talk about?" "She's been telling everyone that Tyler is just a temporary arrangement, that you're going through some kind of midlife crisis phase, and using this adoption to avoid dealing with your real responsibility to give her biological grandchildren. She said you've always been too focused on your career, and that taking in a foster child is your way of avoiding commitment to a real relationship." I couldn't speak. Rachel continued, her voice getting smaller. "At the family reunion last summer, the one you couldn't make it to, because Tyler had that stomach bug, Aunt Margaret arranged all the family photos with just Jessica's family. She said it was easier than explaining to everyone who Tyler was, since he probably wouldn't be around permanently anyway. Rachel, Tyler's adoption was finalized 8 months ago. This isn't temporary. He's legally my son, and more importantly, I love him more than anything in this world. How could you all think this was okay? Wade, I'm so sorry. I thought you were in on it somehow. When you didn't bring him to the reunion, I assumed you agreed that he wasn't really part of the official family yet. Aunt Margaret made it sound like you were still figuring things out. After hanging up with Rachel, I called my Uncle Tom in Denver and my cousin Sarah in Atlanta. The story was consistent across all of them. My mother had been systematically erasing Tyler from our family narrative, presenting my adoption of him as a temporary phase that I would eventually outgrow when I came to my senses and started a real family. The next day, I decided to do something I had never done before. I started going through Jessica's social media accounts methodically. What I found there made me physically sick to my stomach. Over the past 3 years, while I'd been sending her family thousands of dollars every month to help with their financial struggles, Jessica had been posting photos from expensive vacations to Hawaii, the Bahamas, and Colorado ski resorts. Pictures of designer handbags, expensive jewelry, and elaborate dinner parties. Dave, who had supposedly been unemployed for months, had posted pictures of himself at a boat show just 2 weeks earlier, captioned with, "Finally pulled the trigger on the new fishing boat. Life is good when you work hard for what you want." The boat in the photo looked like it cost more than I made in 3 months. I screenshot everything and created a folder on my computer labeled Family Financial Documentation. Then I started going through my own bank records more carefully, cross-referencing the dates of my monthly family bonus payments with Jessica's social media posts. The pattern was undeniable. Every time I sent money for an emergency, Jessica would post photos of some new luxury purchase within days. The medical bills I had been helping pay were apparently real, but they were for cosmetic procedures, not life-threatening emergencies. The mortgage assistance I provided was being used to maintain a lifestyle way beyond what Dave's actual employment could support, not to prevent homelessness, as I had been told. But discovering the financial deception was nothing compared to what I learned when I started asking Tyler some careful questions about his phone conversations with his grandmother. We were sitting at the kitchen table that evening working on a puzzle together when I brought up the subject as casually as I could. "Tyler, when Grandma calls you, what kinds of things do you usually talk about?" Tyler's face immediately changed, and he focused very intently on fitting a puzzle piece into place. "Just stuff." "What kind of stuff does she ask about school, about your friends?" "Sometimes." Tyler's voice was getting quieter. "Mostly she tells me things." A cold dread settled in my chest. "What kinds of things does she tell you?" Tyler was quiet for a long time, turning a puzzle piece over and over in his small hands. Finally, he looked up at me, with those serious brown eyes that had always seemed too old for his face. "She tells me I should be grateful that you wanted to take care of me because not everyone would want a kid like me." I had to grip the edge of the table to keep my voice steady. "Tyler, what does she mean by a kid like you?" "You know." Tyler's voice was barely above a whisper. "A kid who doesn't have real parents. A kid who got thrown away." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Buddy, look at me. You were never thrown away. Your birth parents made a very difficult decision because they wanted you to have the best possible life, and they knew they couldn't provide that for you at the time. That doesn't mean they didn't love you, and it definitely doesn't mean you're less valuable than any other kid." Tyler nodded, but I could tell he was just agreeing to make me feel better. "Grandma says that's what all the adoption papers say, but really it means the same thing. She says blood family is different, and I shouldn't expect to get the same treatment as Emma because Emma is real family and I'm just lucky to be here. I wanted to drive straight to my mother's house and have the confrontation that was long overdue, but Tyler needed me more than my anger needed satisfaction." We spent the rest of the evening talking about family, about love, about what makes someone belong somewhere. I tried to undo months of psychological damage that my own mother had been systematically inflicting on my child. That night, after Tyler finally fell asleep, I called Rachel back. This time I wasn't asking for information, I was demanding it. "Rachel, I need you to tell me everything, not just what Margaret told you, but what other people in the family have been saying. Tyler is being hurt by this, and I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Rachel sighed deeply. "Wade, this is going to be hard to hear, but Aunt Margaret has been telling people at church that she's praying for you to find a woman and have real children because Tyler just isn't the same as having actual family. She's been accepting sympathy from the congregation about your situation, presenting herself as a grandmother whose son is wasting his potential on someone else's damaged child." She said damaged. Those weren't her exact words, but that was the implication. She talks about Tyler like he's a charity case that you're too emotionally invested in to see clearly. She's been telling people that adoptive children always have problems and that you're not equipped to handle a child with that kind of baggage. I was making notes as Rachel talked, documenting every horrible detail. "What else?" At Easter dinner, The one you missed because Tyler had that soccer tournament. Uncle Tom asked why Tyler wasn't there. Aunt Margaret said you were getting too attached to the boy and it was becoming a problem. She said she was worried you were using Tyler to avoid dealing with your fear of real commitment. Real commitment to what? To having biological children with a wife. She's been telling everyone that your adoption of Tyler is really about your commitment issues, not about genuine desire to be a father. She thinks you chose adoption because it gives you the experience of being a parent without the real responsibility that comes with biological children. I asked Rachel to connect me with other family members who had been at gatherings I had missed. Over the next 3 days, I spoke with 7 different relatives across 4 states. The picture that emerged was devastating and consistent. My mother had been running a campaign against Tyler's legitimacy as family for over a year. She had convinced most of our extended family that my adoption of Tyler was a phase I was going through, possibly related to a midlife crisis or fear of real commitment. She had been presenting herself as a concerned mother, watching her son make a mistake that would ultimately hurt both Tyler and me. Cousin Sarah in Atlanta told me that Margaret had called her specifically to discuss Wade's situation after the adoption was finalized. She said you had gotten too emotionally attached during the foster period and couldn't see clearly anymore. She was worried that when you eventually came to your senses and wanted to start a real family, Tyler would be traumatized by being given up again. My Uncle Tom had a different version. Margaret told me you were using Tyler to avoid dealing with your ex-wife's death. She thought you were afraid to risk loving someone who could be taken away from you again, so you chose adoption because it felt safer somehow. None of them had questioned these explanations. None of them had called to ask me directly about my feelings or intentions. They had simply accepted my mother's interpretation of my life and excluded Tyler from family consideration accordingly. The most devastating revelation came from my cousin Mark in Phoenix, who had always been Tyler's favorite family member during our infrequent visits. Mark told me that at the last family reunion, Margaret had explicitly instructed everyone not to get too attached to Tyler because Wade's going through something, and when he gets his head straight, that little boy is going to be heartbroken. She said it would be kinder to keep some emotional distance until your situation stabilized, Mark explained. I thought you knew about the plan. I thought you had agreed that it was better not to let Tyler get too integrated into the family until you were sure about your long-term commitment. That conversation broke something inside me. These people had been deliberately withholding affection from my son because they believed I was going to abandon him eventually. They had turned their emotional distance into a mercy, convinced that protecting themselves from attachment was the same thing as protecting Tyler. I started keeping a detailed journal of every conversation, every revelation, every piece of evidence that showed how systematically my family had worked to exclude Tyler while continuing to benefit from my financial support. The hypocrisy was staggering, but the cruelty was worse. The next morning, I called Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a child psychologist who specialized in adoption and trauma. Tyler had been seeing her monthly since the adoption was finalized, just as a precautionary measure to help him adjust to his new permanent family situation. I had thought these sessions were going well, but now I needed a professional perspective on what my family's behavior might be doing to Tyler's emotional development. Dr. Rodriguez agreed to see me alone first before our next scheduled family session. When I walked into her office that Thursday afternoon, she took one look at my face and immediately closed the door behind me. "Wade, you look like you haven't slept in weeks. What's going on?" I told her everything. The Christmas dinner incident, the financial manipulation, the extended family's systematic exclusion of Tyler, my mother's campaign to present Tyler as temporary. Dr. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened Tyler's file and pulled out several drawings he had made during their recent sessions. "Wade, I've been worried about Tyler for the past month, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was bothering him. These drawings might make more sense now. She spread 3 pictures across her desk. The first showed a stick figure family holding hands, but one figure was drawn significantly smaller and standing slightly apart from the others. The second drawing showed what looked like a house, with several figures visible through windows and one figure standing outside looking in. The third drawing was more abstract, but it clearly showed one figure colored in gray, while all the others were colored in bright, warm colors. Tyler's been expressing feelings of exclusion and unworthiness in our sessions, but he's been very careful not to say anything that might sound critical of you or your family. He's been protecting you, Wade. He doesn't want you to know how much he's hurting because he's afraid it might change how you feel about him. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her session notes from the past 2 months. Tyler told me last week that he's been having nightmares about not being real enough, and that he's been trying to be perfect so that people might love him the same way they love other kids. He's been internalizing the message that his worth is conditional and temporary. What does that mean for his development? It means that the foundational security that adoption is supposed to provide has been systematically undermined by the people who should be reinforcing it. Tyler came to you from a background of instability and abandonment. The whole point of adoption is to create unshakable certainty that he belongs with you permanently. Instead, your family has been reinforcing his deepest fears about being disposable. Dr. Rodriguez showed me more of Tyler's artwork from recent sessions. In every picture that included multiple people, Tyler drew himself as visibly different or separate from the others. Sometimes he was smaller, sometimes he was a different color, sometimes he was physically outside the group. But in every single drawing, the message was clear. Tyler saw himself as fundamentally other. Has he talked about my mother specifically? Not directly, but he's mentioned phone calls with his grandmother that make him feel bad about himself. He's been very careful not to criticize her because he doesn't want to get in trouble, but he's mentioned that she tells him things about being grateful and not expecting too much from family. I felt sick. Dr. Rodriguez, how much damage are we looking at here? Can this be fixed? Children are resilient, Wade, but this kind of psychological injury runs deep because it comes from trusted family members. Tyler's not just dealing with individual instances of rejection, he's developing a core belief system about his own worth and belonging. The good news is that you're catching this now, and you clearly have the power to change the environment he's being exposed to. What do I need to do? Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, her expression serious. You need to completely cut off contact between Tyler and anyone who makes him feel conditionally accepted. That includes your mother, your sister, and anyone else who treats him as less than fully legitimate family. Tyler needs to see you prioritize his emotional safety over family harmony. He needs concrete proof that you choose him over people who hurt him. Even if that means cutting off my own mother, especially if that means cutting off your own mother. Wade Tyler's sense of security with you depends on seeing that you will protect him from harm, even when that harm comes from people you love. If you continue to expose him to people who undermine his sense of belonging, you're inadvertently confirming that their opinion matters more than his well-being. That evening, I sat Tyler down for the most important conversation of our relationship so far. I told him that some people in our family had been saying unkind things that weren't true, and that we weren't going to spend time with those people anymore until they learned to treat him with the respect he deserved. Tyler looked at me with those serious brown eyes. Dad, does that mean we're not real family either? The word dad hit me like a lightning bolt. Tyler had been calling me Wade since the adoption was finalized, even though I had told him he could call me whatever felt comfortable. Hearing him use dad for the first time in the context of asking whether we were real family broke my heart and filled it simultaneously. Tyler, you and I are the most real family that has ever existed. We chose each other completely, and that choice is permanent and unbreakable. No one gets to decide whether we're real family except us, and we've already decided. even if other people don't think so. Especially if other people don't think so. Our family is not a democracy, buddy. Other people don't get a vote. That night, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my mother. I told her that Tyler and I would not be attending any family gatherings, accepting any phone calls, or maintaining any contact with anyone who treated Tyler as less than fully legitimate family. I told her that her behavior had been documented, that Tyler was in therapy to deal with the psychological damage she had caused, and that she had lost the privilege of being his grandmother. The second call was to my bank. I had them immediately stop all automatic transfers to any accounts associated with my mother or sister. After 3 years and nearly $500,000, the family bonus was officially canceled. Margaret called me 17 times over the next 2 days. I didn't answer any of the calls, but I listened to the voicemails. The first few were confused and defensive, insisting that I was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Then they became angry, accusing me of being manipulative and using Tyler as a weapon against the family. By the 4th day, they had shifted to desperate, with Margaret crying and begging me to call her back so they could work things out. Jessica left voicemails too, initially demanding to know why her monthly payment was late, then panicking when she realized it wasn't coming at all. She left increasingly frantic messages about the mortgage payment and Dave's truck payment, neither of which could be covered without my financial contribution. I saved every voicemail as evidence, but I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on building the kind of life Tyler deserved. I opened a college savings account and deposited the $15,000 I would have sent to Jessica that month. I set up automatic transfers so that Tyler's future education would be funded instead of my family's present lifestyle. Dr. Rodriguez had recommended that we build a chosen family network of people who fully embraced both Tyler and me as a complete unit. I started reaching out to other adoptive parents in our area, connecting with support groups, and strengthening relationships with Tyler's friends' families who had always treated him with natural acceptance and warmth. Tyler's soccer coach, Mike Henderson, had always been particularly supportive. When I explained our situation in general terms, he immediately invited us to join his own family for their weekly Sunday dinners. Wade family is what you make it, not what you're born into. Tyler's a great kid, and you're both welcome at our table anytime. I also reconnected with some old friends from college who had moved to our city over the years. People like Jake Morrison and his wife Linda, who had twin daughters Tyler's age, and had always included us in birthday parties and family barbecues without question. When I started accepting more of their invitations and reciprocating with invitations of my own, Tyler began to experience what healthy family relationships actually looked like. The contrast was striking. Tyler started smiling more, laughing more freely, and speaking up more confidently in group settings. He stopped trying to be perfect all the time and started acting like a normal 7-year-old who felt secure in his relationships. But I wasn't done addressing the damage my biological family had caused. I decided to document everything systematically before deciding on my final response. I created a comprehensive timeline of financial support I had provided over the years, cross-referenced with evidence of their lifestyle choices and their treatment of Tyler. The financial records told an incredible story. Over 3 years, I had provided $487,000 in direct financial support to my mother and sister's family. This included monthly bonus payments, emergency assistance, home improvement costs, medical bills, and educational expenses. During that same period, based on their social media posts and public records, they had spent money on luxury vacations, expensive vehicles, designer clothing, cosmetic procedures, and entertainment that far exceeded what their legitimate income could support. More importantly, I documented every instance of psychological harm they had inflicted on Tyler. I recorded the dates and details of phone conversations where my mother had made Tyler feel guilty for existing. I documented the family gatherings we had been excluded from, and the family photos Tyler had been deliberately left out of. I collected written testimonies from family members who could verify that Margaret had been systematically undermining Tyler's sense of belonging. I also worked with Dr. Rodriguez to document the therapeutic interventions Tyler required as a direct result of my family's behavior. The psychological evaluation showed clear evidence of anxiety, depression, and attachment issues that correlated directly with his interactions with my extended family. 3 weeks after cutting off contact and financial support, I received a certified letter from Jessica. She was threatening legal action unless I resumed the monthly payments, claiming that I had made verbal commitments that constituted legally binding agreements. She accused me of abandoning family obligations and using Tyler as an excuse to avoid my responsibilities. That letter was exactly what I needed to finalize my plans. I scheduled a meeting with a family law attorney to discuss my options for protecting Tyler from further psychological harm. The attorney, Helen Chang, reviewed all of my documentation and listened to my recorded evidence of the family's treatment of Tyler. Wade, you have an incredibly strong case for demonstrating that your biological family poses a threat to Tyler's emotional well-being. If they ever tried to claim grandparents' rights or visitation privileges, this documentation would be more than sufficient to prove that contact with them is not in Tyler's best interests. What about the financial threats Jessica is making? She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. Gifts of money to family members, even regular gifts over a long period, don't constitute binding financial obligations unless there was a written contract specifying terms and conditions. You can stop giving people money whenever you choose. Attorney Chang helped me draft cease and desist letters to my mother and sister, formally demanding that they stop contacting Tyler and me and stop spreading false information about Tyler's status in our family. The letters specified that any future contact would be considered harassment and would result in legal action. But the most important work I did during those weeks was emotional. Tyler and I spent hours talking about family belonging, love, and loyalty. We talked about the difference between people who earn the title of family through their actions and people who claim it just because of shared genetics. Tyler's confidence grew every day as he realized that our relationship was unconditional and permanent, regardless of what anyone else thought about it. He started calling me Dad consistently. And he started talking about our plans for the future with certainty instead of hope. Dad, when I'm older, can I adopt a kid too? He asked one evening while we were building a model airplane together. Tyler, you can do anything you want when you're older. Why do you want to adopt a kid? Because then they'll have a real dad like I do, and I'll make sure nobody ever makes them feel like they're not good enough. 6 weeks after I cut off all contact and financial support, Margaret showed up at my house unannounced. Tyler was at soccer practice, which was fortunate because I didn't want him to witness what was about to happen. When I opened the front door and saw my mother standing there with tears in her eyes, my first instinct was to hug her and try to work things out. But then I remembered Tyler's drawings of himself standing outside the family circle, and my resolve hardened. Margaret, I sent you a cease and desist letter. You're not supposed to be contacting us. Wade, please, I'm your mother. We need to talk about this situation before it goes too far. I understand you're angry, but you're hurting the whole family over a misunderstanding. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not inviting her in. It's not a misunderstanding. You've been systematically telling Tyler that he's not real family while taking my money to support your lifestyle. That's not confusion. That's calculated cruelty. That's not what happened, and you know it. I've always been kind to Tyler. I've never said anything to hurt that child deliberately. I pulled out my phone and played the recording I had made of Tyler, describing his phone conversations with her. Margaret's voice was clearly audible, telling Tyler that he should be grateful I had taken him in because not everyone would want a child like him, and that he shouldn't expect the same treatment as real family members because blood is thicker than water. Margaret's face went white as she heard her own words played back. Wade, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was just trying to help Tyler understand his place in the family structure. His place in the family structure is as my son, which makes him your grandson. There is no other place for him. But you have to understand it's different when a child isn't actually yours by blood. I wasn't trying to hurt Tyler. I was trying to help him have realistic expectations. Realistic expectations of what of being treated like a second-class family member for the rest of his life. Margaret started crying in earnest now. Wade, I never wanted any of this to happen. I just thought Tyler should understand that adoption is different from biological relationships. I didn't want him to be disappointed when he realized that other people might not see him the same way you do. So you decided to be the first person to teach him that lesson? You decided to make sure he understood that his own grandmother saw him as temporary and conditional. That's not what I was doing. I love Tyler, but I also love you. And I was concerned that you weren't thinking clearly about the long-term implications of adoption. I thought if Tyler understood the reality of his situation, it would be easier for everyone when you eventually decided to start a biological family. I stared at my mother in disbelief. Even now, even after being confronted with recorded evidence of the psychological damage she had caused, she still believed that Tyler was temporary, and that I would eventually replace him with biological children. Margaret, Tyler is not temporary. He is not a placeholder. He is not practice for real parenthood. He is my son permanently and completely, and I am never going to have other children, because I already have the child I want. But Wade, you're only 34 years old. You could still meet someone and have a real family. I have a real family. Tyler and I are a real family. The fact that you can't understand that is exactly why you're not part of it anymore. Margaret seemed genuinely shocked by my response. You can't mean that. You can't choose some random child over your own mother. Tyler is not some random child. He's my son. And yes, I absolutely choose my son over anyone who would hurt him, including you. Wade, please think about what you're doing. You're destroying our entire family over this adoption obsession. Your father would be horrified if he could see what you're doing to me. My father would be horrified to see what you've done to his grandson. Margaret's expression shifted from pleading to angry. Tyler is not your father's grandson, Wade. Your father is dead, and Tyler never even met him. You can't retroactively create family relationships that never existed. Tyler is part of our family because I adopted him, which makes him Dad's grandson, whether Dad met him or not. The fact that you can't understand that shows exactly why we can't have a relationship with you. This is insane, Wade. You're choosing a troubled foster child over your entire biological family. When you come to your senses, Tyler is going to be traumatized all over again, and it will be your fault. Tyler is not troubled, and he's not a foster child. He's an adopted child with a permanent family who loves him unconditionally. The only trauma he's experienced has come from people like you who treat him as if his worth is debatable. Margaret pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos. Look at this, Wade. Look at Jessica's family. Look at Emma. This is what real family looks like. This is the kind of family you could have if you stopped this adoption experiment and focused on finding a wife and having biological children. I looked at the photos she was showing me. Jessica, Dave, and Emma at various family gatherings looking happy and connected. The same gatherings Tyler and I had been systematically excluded from. Margaret, Tyler, and I are not invited to these gatherings anymore. Remember? You've made it clear that we're not welcome in the family unless Tyler agrees to be treated as a second-class member. So these photos don't represent family that I'm missing out on. They represent family that chose to exclude us. We excluded you because you refused to accept reality. Tyler is not your biological son, and pretending otherwise is confusing for everyone, especially Emma. She's been the only grandchild for 12 years, and suddenly You expect her to treat some stranger like an equal family member. Tyler is not a stranger. He's been my son for 2 years and legally my son for 8 months. The fact that Emma still sees him as a stranger is because you've taught her to see him that way. Margaret put her phone away and looked at me with something that might have been pity. Wade, I know you think you love Tyler, but this intensity isn't healthy. You're so defensive about him that you can't see how your adoption has affected the rest of us. We've been patient and supportive, but you're asking us to pretend that adoption is the same as biological family, and it's just not. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. Tyler is my son. That makes him your grandson if you choose to acknowledge it, or it makes you someone who chooses not to acknowledge her own grandson. Either way, Tyler's status in this family is not up for debate. Wade, you're being completely unreasonable. I'm trying to find a compromise here, but you won't even consider my perspective. What if we agree that Tyler can come to family gatherings, but we don't include him in official family photos until you've been his father for longer? What if we wait a few years to see how things develop before we fully integrate him into family traditions? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Margaret, Tyler has been my son for 2 years. How much longer do you need to see how things develop? And what do you mean by official family photos? I mean the photos we send out with Christmas cards, the photos we use for family directories at church, the portraits we hang in our homes. Those photos represent permanent family relationships, and I think we should wait to include Tyler until we're sure this adoption is going to work out long term. This adoption is permanent, Margaret. There is no trial period. Tyler is not on probation with this family. But Wade, you have to admit that adoptions sometimes don't work out. What if Tyler has behavioral problems as he gets older? What if he turns out to have serious psychological issues from his background? What if you meet someone who doesn't want to raise another woman's child? I realized in that moment that nothing I could say would ever convince my mother to accept Tyler as legitimate family. Her rejection of him wasn't based on confusion or misunderstanding. It was based on fundamental beliefs about blood relationships and biological family that would never change. Margaret, this conversation is over. Tyler is my son, period. Anyone who can't accept that is not welcome in our lives. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. Wade, please don't do this. Think about Jessica and Emma. Think about how much they need your support. Think about how much I need you. You're my only son. And Tyler is my only son. If you can't treat him with the same love and respect you'd show any other grandson, then you can't be part of our lives. Margaret stood up to leave but turned back one more time. Wade, when this adoption experiment fails and Tyler breaks your heart or gets taken away or whatever happens to these kinds of arrangements, don't expect me to be here to pick up the pieces. You're making your choice, and I'm making mine too. Margaret, the only thing that's going to break my heart is if Tyler ever finds out that his grandmother never saw him as real family. But that's not going to happen because he's never going to have contact with you again. After Margaret left, I sat on my front steps for a long time trying to process what had just happened. The conversation had confirmed my worst fears about my family's attitudes toward Tyler, but it had also clarified something important for me. This wasn't about misunderstanding or poor communication. This was about fundamental values and priorities, and my family and I simply didn't share the same ones. That evening, when Tyler came home from soccer practice, he looked at my face and immediately knew something had happened. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, buddy. I just had to have a difficult conversation with someone who doesn't understand how much I love you." Tyler sat down next to me on the couch. Was it about me being adopted? Tyler? Some people think that adoption is different from biological family, but they're wrong. Love is what makes family, not genetics. And I love you more than anything in this world. I love you too, Dad, and I don't care what other people think about us. Good, because what other people think doesn't matter. What matters is that you and I know we're real family, and nothing anyone says can change that. 3 months after cutting off all contact with my biological family, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing my mother and sister. They were demanding that I resume financial support, claiming that I had created financial dependency, and that withdrawing support constituted elder abuse and breach of verbal contract. I forwarded the letter to my own attorney, Helen Chang, who called me later that day laughing. "Wade, this is the most ridiculous legal threat I've seen in years. They're essentially arguing that you're legally required to continue giving them money because they've become accustomed to receiving it. That's not how the law works. What do I need to do? Nothing. I'll send them a response explaining that gifts are not contracts and that threatening legal action over discontinued gifts is frivolous litigation. I'll also mention that we have documented evidence of psychological harm to Tyler, which would make any court appearance very uncomfortable for them." Helen was right. After receiving our response, my mother and sister's attorney advised them to drop their threats and try to resolve the situation privately. But there was nothing to resolve. I had made my decision, and it was permanent. The financial consequences for my family were swift and severe. Without my monthly contributions, Jessica and Dave couldn't make their mortgage payments. They had to sell their house and move into a smaller rental property. Dave had to get an actual job instead of relying on my support to maintain his lifestyle. Emma had to leave her expensive private school and enroll in public school. Margaret had to take a part-time job at a local department store to supplement her Social Security income. The woman who had been telling people that Tyler wasn't her real grandson was now folding clothes for minimum wage, because her real grandson's father had decided to prioritize his son's emotional well-being over her financial comfort. I felt no guilt about any of this. These were adults who had made choices, and consequences were the natural result of those choices. They had chosen to treat Tyler as disposable, while treating my money as essential. They had learned that Tyler and my money were a package deal. Meanwhile, Tyler and I were building the life we both deserved. The college fund I had opened for him was growing rapidly without the drain of my family's financial needs. We took our first vacation together that summer, a week-long camping trip in Colorado that Tyler still talks about as the best week of his life. Tyler's emotional health improved dramatically once he was no longer exposed to people who made him feel conditionally accepted. Dr. Rodriguez noted significant progress in his therapy sessions, reporting that Tyler's drawings now consistently showed himself as an integrated member of whatever group he was depicting. Wade Tyler's sense of security has solidified remarkably, Dr. Rodriguez told me during one of our consultations. He's no longer trying to earn love through perfect behavior, and he's no longer expressing anxiety about his permanence in your family. The work you've done to protect him from harmful relationships has been exactly what he needed. Tyler started sleeping through the night without nightmares. He started expressing opinions more confidently. He started talking about the future with certainty instead of hope. Most importantly, he started believing that he deserved love without having to earn it constantly. Our chosen family network expanded naturally as we became more open to new relationships. Mike Henderson's family became like extended relatives to us, with Tyler calling Mike's wife Sarah Aunt Sarah and treating their children like cousins. Jake Morrison and his family filled the same role, providing Tyler with adult relationships that were based on genuine affection rather than biological obligation. Tyler thrived in this environment of unconditional acceptance. His grades improved, his confidence grew, and his natural personality emerged without the anxiety that had been suppressing it for months. He joined the school chess club, started taking guitar lessons, and made friends easily without worrying constantly about whether people would like him. 6 months after cutting off my biological family, I ran into my cousin Rachel at a grocery store. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, but she approached anyway. "Wade, I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry about everything that happened. I should have questioned what Aunt Margaret was telling us about Tyler. I should have called you directly instead of just accepting her version of the story. Rachel, I appreciate you saying that, but the damage is done. Tyler spent months believing that his own extended family saw him as temporary and conditional. That's not something you can just apologize away. I know, I just wanted you to know that some of us understand now that we were wrong. And I wanted you to know that Tyler is always welcome in my home if you ever want to visit. I thanked Rachel for her offer, but I made it clear that Tyler and I had moved on. We had built new traditions, new relationships, and a new definition of family that didn't include people who had to be convinced that Tyler was worth loving. That Christmas, Tyler and I hosted our own dinner for our chosen family. Mike and Sarah Henderson came with their kids along with Jake and Linda Morrison and their twins. Tyler's soccer teammates and their families filled our house with laughter and warmth. Tyler helped me cook the entire meal wearing an apron that said, "World's Best Sous Chef," and beaming with pride as people complimented his contributions to the dinner. As we sat around our table surrounded by people who loved and accepted us unconditionally, Tyler raised his glass of apple cider and made a toast. I want to thank everyone for being our real family. Dad and I are really lucky to have people who love us just the way we are. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a peace that I had never experienced during all those years of trying to make my biological family accept Tyler. This was what family was supposed to feel like. This was what Tyler deserved, and what I deserved too. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Tyler was helping me clean up, he looked at me seriously. "Dad, do you ever miss your old family?" "Tyler, I miss the idea of what they could have been if they had chosen to love you the way you deserve to be loved. But I don't miss the reality of what they actually were. I'm glad we have our new family instead." "Me too, buddy, me too." That night, I received a text message from my mother. It was the first communication I had received from her in months. "Wade, I just wanted to wish you and Tyler a Merry Christmas. I hope you're both happy." I showed the message to Tyler and asked him what he thought I should say back. Tyler considered the question seriously. "Maybe you should tell her that we are happy and that we hope she learns someday that families are made of love, not blood." I typed exactly what Tyler had suggested and sent the message. Then I deleted my mother's number from my phone. Tyler and I spent the rest of the evening looking through photo albums from our first year together, remembering all the ways our little family had grown and changed. In every picture, Tyler looked genuinely happy and secure. No longer the anxious child who had been trying to earn love through perfect behavior. "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Always, buddy. What's on your mind?" "I'm glad your old family didn't want me, because if they had, you might not have realized how much better our new family is." Tyler was right. The rejection we had experienced from my biological family had forced us to build something better, something based on choice and commitment rather than obligation and tradition. We had learned that real family is not about who shares your DNA, but about who chooses to love you unconditionally and permanently. 1 year after cutting off contact with my biological family, Tyler and I were stronger, happier, and more secure than we had ever been. We had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect the people you care about from the people who would hurt them, even when those people claim to be family. Tyler had grown into a confident, secure, joyful child who knew without question that he was loved completely and permanently. I had grown into a father who understood that protecting my son's emotional well-being was more important than maintaining relationships with people who threatened that well-being. We had built a real family, chosen family, permanent family. And we had learned that family created by love and commitment is stronger than family created by accident of birth. The financial bonus I had been sending to my mother and sister for 3 years had indeed been sent elsewhere, to Tyler's future, to our shared adventures, to building relationships with people who saw us as we truly were a father and son who belonged together completely and permanently. Looking back, I realized that the cruel words spoken at that Christmas dinner had been a gift in disguise. They had forced me to confront a toxic dynamic that was damaging the most important relationship in my life. They had shown me that choosing Tyler meant choosing against anyone who couldn't accept him fully. And I would make that choice again every single day for the rest of our lives together. Now, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and maintaining relationships with family members who hurt them? Sometimes the most difficult decisions in life are also the most necessary ones. How do you think families should handle situations where acceptance isn't automatic, but love demands protection? Thank you for listening to Tyler's and my story. I hope it helps you think about what real family means and reminds you that sometimes building new traditions is more important than preserving old ones. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with someone who might need to hear that chosen family can be just as strong as biological family. Until next time, remember that love is always worth protecting no matter what it costs.